everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling a topic that I think is way more common than a lot of people realize, and it can really have a huge impact on your life. We're going to be talking about toxic relationships. We'll be looking at what they are, how you can spot them, and most importantly, what you can do about it if you find yourself in one. Our main source for today's deep dive is going to be an article from Calm titled Six Signs of a Toxic Relationship and How to End Them. So, have you ever felt like you're walking on eggshells around someone? Like you're always afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing and setting them off. Or maybe you've noticed that your self-esteem just seems to plummet every time you hang out with a certain person. Well, that's what we're going to be digging into today. We're going to figure out how to recognize those red flags and, more importantly, what you can do about it.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's important to remember that we're not just talking about, like regular disagreements or arguments here. Every relationship has those from time to time. What makes a relationship toxic is that there's this consistent pattern of behavior. It's harmful, disrespectful, and even manipulative.
So it's not just a one-off thing, it's like a vibe.
Exactly. It's a pattern.
Yeah.
And it really undermines the well-being of the people in their relationship.
Okay, so that makes sense. So how do we know then, how do we know if a relationship has crossed that line? You know what I mean? Like from just normal disagreements into actually toxic.
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest things to pay attention to is how you feel after spending time with this person. Like, do you feel emotionally drained, anxious? Do you feel worse about yourself? Those are some pretty big red flags that something might be off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense, right? Because those feelings don't just stay in the relationship. They can kind of spill over into other areas of your life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, chronic stress and anxiety can lead to all sorts of problems. Like sleeplessness, changes in appetite, even physical health issues.
Wow, so it can really impact you on every level.
Absolutely. Toxic relationships really do take a toll on both your mind and your body.
Okay, so now I think we all understand why this is so important, right? So let's dive into those warning signs. The Calm article that we're looking at outlines 6 major red flags. The first one is feeling unsafe or on edge. Now, I feel like that one's kind of straightforward, right? But maybe you can give us a few more specific examples of what that might look like in an actual relationship.
Sure. So imagine, for example, that you're constantly worrying about how your partner is going to react to something you say or do. Like you're always kind of second-guessing yourself.
Yeah.
You're afraid of maybe triggering an outburst or even just disapproval. That feeling of walking on eggshells?
Yeah.
That's a pretty strong sign that something isn't quite right.
Yeah. It's like you can't really be yourself around them. You're always kind of on guard.
Exactly. And that can be exhausting.
Oh, totally. And you know what? That actually ties into the second sign on the list, constant disrespect.
Right.
So this can be super obvious, right? Like blatant insults or name calling, but it can also be a lot more subtle.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like maybe consistently dismissing your feelings or opinion.
Yeah.
So how can you tell, how can someone tell if it's just a difference of opinion versus, actual disrespect?
I think a good way to think about it is whether your feelings and boundaries are being acknowledged and respected, even if the other person doesn't necessarily agree with them. If you constantly feel invalidated or your needs just don't matter, that's a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's more about how they make you feel, not just the specific words they're using.
Exactly.
Okay, so that brings us to the third sign, and this one is unmet needs.
Okay.
So what are some examples of needs that might be neglected in a toxic relationship?
Well, I think in any relationship, we all have certain basic needs, right? Like we crave emotional support, intimacy, a sense of belonging. We want to feel seen and heard and understood. And in a toxic relationship, you often find that you're consistently giving more than you're receiving.
So it's not about having every single need met all the time, but it's more about that overall feeling of being supported and valued and having your needs acknowledged.
Yeah, and if you're constantly feeling emotionally neglected or your needs are just being ignored, that's a definite sign to pay attention to.
Okay, so the fourth sign is always taking the blame.
Right.
And this one, I feel like this one can be really subtle.
Oh, absolutely.
And hard to recognize.
It can be very sneaky.
Yeah, how does that usually play out?
Well, toxic individuals are often really good at kind of twisting the narrative to make you feel responsible for their own actions or for problems in the relationship. So you end up constantly apologizing and taking on this burden of trying to fix things, even when it's really not your fault at all.
Yeah, I think I get that. It's you always feel like you're the one who has to compromise. or change, even when the other person is clearly contributing to the problem too.
Exactly. And that can really wear you down over time.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so moving on to the fifth sign, we have isolation. And I know this is a classic tactic, especially for abusers, but can you talk a little bit about how it can manifest in maybe some more subtle ways?
Sure. It can start with what seem like really harmless suggestions,
Mm.
like, oh, let's just stay in tonight, or I don't really like your friend so-and-so. And slowly, you find yourself spending less and less time with your friends and family, and your world starts to get smaller and smaller.
And then that isolation actually makes you more dependent on that toxic person. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle. They're trying to control your narrative
Yeah.
and limit your access to outside support.
Wow, that's heavy. Okay, so the sixth and final sign on the list is diminished self-esteem.
Right.
And this one, I feel like this one hits hard because it can be so insidious,
You really can.
It's like you might not even realize it's happening until you just feel completely worthless.
Yeah. It's like a slow drip of negativity that eventually just wears you down.
So what are some of the ways that this can happen? Like, how does someone's self-esteem get eroded like that?
It's often a combination of things,
Mm.
constant criticism, belittling comments, gaslighting. All of these things can really chip away at your self-worth over time. And you start to believe those negative assessments of you. And your confidence just plummets.
It's like they're slowly draining your self-belief.
Exactly. And that can make it really hard to make healthy choices in the relationship.
Okay, so we've covered these six signs, but I have a feeling there's more to this story, right? These are kind of like the warning bells. But what are the actual behaviors that make a relationship toxic?
You're right. These signs are just the tip of the iceberg. Let's get into the nitty-gritty and talk about some of the specific toxic behaviors that often lurk beneath the surface.
Awesome, I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, so one of the most insidious and damaging behaviors is gaslighting. Have you ever had someone, maybe your partner, deny saying things that you know they said? Like making you question your own memory. That's gaslighting.
Oh, yeah. It's like they're messing with your head, right? Making you doubt your own sanity.
Exactly. And that can make you much easier to manipulate and control.
Wow, that's scary. So what else is on the list?
Well, another common tactic is degrading behavior. So this can be anything from belittling comments and insults
Yeah.
to mockery, anything designed to make you feel inferior.
Oh, I've definitely seen that. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each comment might seem small on its own, but over time, they just chip away at your confidence and self-worth.
That's a great way to put it. And then, of course, there's the constant criticism. Nothing is ever good enough. You're always being picked apart.
Mm.
And you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid their disapproval.
Oh, I can imagine that would be so draining.
It is. It's exhausting.
And speaking of feeling defeated, let's talk about blaming, because it seems like toxic people are experts at deflecting responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. They're masters at twisting situations around
Yeah.
to make you feel like it's always your fault, even when it's clearly not. And this can lead to a really unhealthy cycle of constant apologizing and self-blame,
Mm-hmm.
which just further erodes your sense of self.
So it's not just about them avoiding responsibility. It's about actively making you feel bad about yourself.
Exactly.
Wow, that's messed up. Okay, what else?
Well, then there's jealousy and suspicion, which can be really suffocating.
Yeah, for sure.
It goes way beyond just healthy protectiveness, We're talking about extreme possessiveness, unfounded accusations, and constant attempts to control your interactions with other people.
Oh, I see. So it's not really about them caring about you. It's about them wanting to control you.
Exactly. It's rooted in insecurity and a lack of trust.
Right. And, that actually ties into another toxic behavior, controlling behavior.
Yes, absolutely.
So this can show up in a lot of different ways, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It can be anything from dictating what you wear, who you see, how you spend your time, even how you think.
Wow. So it really is about power and dominance.
It is. It's about controlling the other person.
Okay. And then the last one on the list is egocentricity, which basically means it's all about me.
Right. In these relationships, the toxic individual's needs always come first. And your needs, your feelings, your desires, they're consistently ignored or minimized.
So it's like this constant one-sided giving and taking.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the signs and we've talked about the behaviors, but it's important to remember that toxicity isn't one size fits all, right?
That's a really important point.
Like it can manifest in different ways.
Absolutely. Toxicity can take many forms, and the Calm article actually highlights 6 different types of toxic relationships.
Oh, wow. Okay, so each one has its own kind of unique dynamics and challenges.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's break those down a little bit. First up, we have abusive relationships. And this is obviously the most serious form, right? Like we're talking about physical, emotional, or sexual abuse.
Right. Any behavior that causes harm or fear. And if you're in this situation, please know that you're not alone, and there's help available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is a great resource. Their number is 1-800-799-7233. Your safety is the top priority.
That's so important to remember. You don't have to suffer in silence. There are people who want to help. All right, so moving on from that, we have codependent relationships. What sets this type apart from the others?
Codependency is all about an unhealthy reliance on each other. It's like
What's-
two people who are so intertwined that they've lost their individual identities. They rely so heavily on each other for validation and self-worth that they can't really function independently.
Wow, so it's like two halves trying to make a whole
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
instead of two whole people coming together.
Exactly.
That sounds really stifling.
It can be, and it often leads to resentment and a lack of personal growth.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so the next type of toxic relationship is one marked by infidelity. And that can be incredibly painful
Yeah.
and damaging,
Yeah.
even if forgiveness is offered. Often the underlying issues haven't been addressed, so it leads to these repeated cycles of hurt and betrayal.
You're right. It's about more than just the act of cheating itself. It's about the broken promises, the lies, the deep emotional wounds.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so another challenging type is a relationship where addiction is present.
Ah,
So when there's substance abuse or other types of addiction, they often take center stage, right? It overshadows everything else.
yeah. The addiction becomes the priority,
Yeah.
and the needs of both partners really get neglected.
Yeah, I imagine that creates a lot of chaos and unpredictability.
It does. It makes it almost impossible to build a healthy, stable connection.
Right. Okay, so then we have those competing or jealous relationships,
Yes.
which sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It can be. These relationships are all about one-upmanship and constant comparison. Instead of supporting each other's successes, they're constantly trying to outdo each other or even undermine each other.
Wow, that's so counterproductive.
It is, and jealousy runs rampant in these relationships, which creates this toxic brew of resentment and insecurity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It really prevents any genuine connection
Mhm.
or intimacy
Right.
because it's always a competition.
Right. Okay, and then the final type of toxic relationship that we'll be discussing today is the emotionally manipulative one,
Right.
which can be incredibly sneaky and difficult to detect.
It really can. It's like a masterclass in manipulation.
Yeah, like what are some of the tactics they might use?
Oh, they're really good at using guilt trips, gaslighting, playing the victim, all sorts of things to get their way.
So it's all about control.
Exactly.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here. From those initial warning signs to all the different behaviors and then all these different types of toxic relationships. It's a lot to take in. But I think the most important question now is, what do you do if you find yourself in one of these situations?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Breaking free from a toxic relationship can be really challenging, but it is absolutely possible. And the Calm article actually outlines 10 ways to do just that.
Okay, before we dive into those 10 steps, I
Yeah.
just want to take a moment to acknowledge how difficult and emotionally charged this topic can be. If you're listening and relating to any of this, please know that you're not alone and there is hope.
You're absolutely right. This is a safe space, and we're here to offer support and guidance.
Okay, so let's take a deep breath and explore those 10 steps that can help you break free.
Yeah.
And start building healthier connections.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
do it. Okay, so we're going to equip you with these 10 steps from the Calm article that can help you break free from a toxic relationship. And it is a journey, right? It's not going to be easy, but every step you take towards freedom is a victory in itself.
Absolutely. And the first step, which is often the toughest one, is recognizing that you need to make a change. It's acknowledging the reality of the situation. This relationship is harmful. It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And you need to make a conscious decision to prioritize your well-being.
Yeah, and I think that can be so hard because
No.
sometimes it's just easier to stay in a situation that's familiar, even if it's hurting you, than to face the unknown.
I completely agree. It's definitely easier to stay in that comfort zone,
Yeah.
even when it's not actually comfortable at all.
Right, exactly. But once you've made that decision, that recognition is really the foundation for everything that comes next.
It is.
So what's next?
The next step is super important, and that's seeking support. Don't try to go through this alone.
Yeah, for sure.
Reach out to people you trust, friends, family members, a therapist, maybe even a support group. Having that network of support can really make all the difference.
Okay, so this is something I'm curious about. Like, what are some practical tips for actually reaching out? Because I feel like it can be so intimidating to open up about these things, especially if you've been isolated or made to feel ashamed.
You're absolutely right. It takes courage. But start by identifying just one or two people that you really trust. Maybe it's a close friend or a family member, a mentor. And then choose a time and a place where you feel comfortable and safe to talk. You don't have to share everything at once. Just start by saying something like, hey, I'm going through a tough time in my relationship and I could really use some support.
Okay, so just be direct and honest.
Exactly. And remember, there are professional resources available too. Therapists can provide a really safe and confidential space to process your emotions
Uh,
and develop strategies for moving forward.
right. Asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've recognized the need for change. We've sought out support. What comes next?
Step 3 is all about setting boundaries. This means communicating to the toxic individual what behaviors are unacceptable and what will happen if they continue.
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming your autonomy and establishing those healthy limits.
Okay, so this sounds crucial, but I imagine it can be incredibly difficult, especially if you're dealing with someone who's used to getting their way.
Oh, for sure. It takes practice and a lot of courage.
So how do you actually go about doing that?
Well, start by identifying your non-negotiables. These are the behaviors that you absolutely will not tolerate. And then you need to communicate those boundaries clearly and calmly. Use I statements. For example, you can say something like, I feel disrespected when you speak to me that way, and I will not tolerate it.
Yeah.
If you continue, I will leave the room.
Okay, so it's about backing up your words with actions.
Exactly. Consistency is key. And remember, setting boundaries is not about controlling the other person. It's about protecting yourself and your well-being.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's step 4?
Step 4 is especially important if the relationship involves any kind of abuse. And this is creating a safety plan.
Okay, so this is about putting your safety above all else.
Exactly.
What are some key elements of a safety plan?
Well, it might involve things like saving some money, identifying a safe place to stay if you need to leave quickly, having a list of emergency contacts, and knowing what steps to take if you're in immediate danger.
So it's about being prepared and having a plan in place.
Exactly.
There are resources available, right, to help people create a safety plan.
Oh, absolutely. There are lots of resources online and through domestic violence organizations.
Okay, good to know. So what's next?
Step 5 is gradual disengagement.
Gradual disengagement. Okay. Why is that sometimes necessary?
Well, sometimes it's safer to slowly reduce contact and distance yourself from the toxic person, especially if there's a risk of retaliation. Or if you just need some time to build up your strength and resources.
So it's not always about having that big dramatic confrontation.
Not necessarily.
It's more about strategically creating space and protecting yourself.
Exactly.
Okay, so how would you actually go about doing that?
It might involve things like declining invitations, limiting phone calls, maybe gradually spending less time together. The key is to prioritize your safety and well-being while creating that distance,
Okay, that makes sense. What's step 6?
if it's safe to do so. Having a direct conversation about your decision to end the relationship can be helpful for closure. But it's important to plan this conversation carefully and to really focus on your needs and feelings, not on blaming the other person.
So it's not about getting into a big argument
No.
or trying to change their mind. It's just about clearly stating your decision
Exactly.
and setting those final boundaries.
Right. You could say something like, I've decided that this relationship is no longer healthy for me and I'm ending it. I wish you well, but I'm moving on.
Okay, I see. So what's next?
In some cases, cutting off contact completely may be necessary.
Oh, wow. That sounds pretty drastic.
It can be. But it's really important for protecting yourself from further harm and for allowing yourself to truly heal and move on.
So it's not about punishing the other person. It's about taking care of yourself.
Exactly.
Okay, so how would you actually go about cutting off contact?
Well, it might involve locking phone numbers, emails, and social media accounts. Anything that helps you create that clean break.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's step 8?
Step 8 is seeking professional help.
Okay, so therapy.
Yeah. Therapists can provide really invaluable guidance and support during this difficult time. They can help you process your emotions, rebuild your self-esteem, and develop healthier relationship patterns for the future.
Okay, so it's really about investing in yourself and your future,
It is.
and remembering that asking for help is a sign of strength.
Absolutely.
All right, 2 steps left. What comes next?
Focusing on self-care. Ending a toxic relationship can be incredibly draining, both emotionally and physically. So it's really important to prioritize your well-being during this time.
So what does self-care look like in this context?
Well, it's about doing things that nourish your mind, body, and spirit. This might involve getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, exercising, spending time in nature, pursuing hobbies you enjoy, connecting with loved ones who bring you joy.
So it's really about treating yourself with kindness and compassion,
Amazing.
giving yourself the space and time you need to heal.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then the final step, step 10, is reflecting and learning.
That's right. Once you've created some distance from the toxic relationship, it's important to take some time to reflect on what happened and learn from the experience.
So it's not just about escaping the bad relationship. It's about understanding why it happened and how to avoid similar situations in the future.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been such a powerful and insightful deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from identifying the signs of a toxic relationship to understanding the different types, and most importantly, exploring these 10 steps for breaking free and creating healthier connections.
Yeah, it's been a heavy topic, but I hope our listeners feel empowered by this knowledge. You deserve to be in relationships that bring you joy, support, and a sense of true connection.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone. There are resources available to help you every step of the way. If you're struggling, please reach out for support. You deserve to be happy and to have healthy, fulfilling relationships. And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a topic that matters. Take care.
Okay, so let's get into those 10 steps that the Calm article outlines for how to actually break free from a toxic relationship. And again, you know it's a journey. It's not always going to be easy, but you know every step that you take toward freedom is a win.
Exactly. And that first step, often the toughest one, is recognizing that you need to change.
Yeah.
It's about, really acknowledging that this relationship is harmful, it's not sustainable, and you need to prioritize your own well-being. Yeah, and that can be so hard, I think, because sometimes it's easier to stay in a situation that's familiar, even if it's hurting us, than to face the unknown.
Absolutely.
But that recognition is really the foundation for everything that comes next.
It is. It's that first step.
Okay, so what's next?
The next step is seeking support.
Yeah.
Don't try to go through this alone. Reach out to trusted friends, family members, a therapist, maybe a support group. Having that network of support can make all the difference.
So you're saying like really lean into that support system?
Exactly.
Okay, and how do we actually go about reaching out? Because I feel like a lot of people, it can be so intimidating to open up.
That's very true. It takes courage. But start by identifying one or two people that you really trust. It could be a close friend, a family member, a mentor. Choose a time and place where you feel comfortable and safe to talk. And remember, you don't have to share everything at once. Just start by saying something like, hey, I'm going through a tough time in my relationship, and I could really use some support.
So just be direct and honest.
Exactly.
Okay.
And remember, there are always professional resources available as well. Therapists can provide a really safe and confidential space to process your emotions and develop strategies for moving forward.
Right. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've recognized the need for change. We've sought out support. What comes next?
The next step is all about setting boundaries.
Okay.
This involves communicating to the toxic individual what behaviors are unacceptable and what will happen if those behaviors continue. It's about, reclaiming your autonomy and establishing those healthy limits.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a really important step, but also probably really difficult to do.
It can be very difficult,
Huh.
especially if you're dealing with someone who's used to getting their way.
Right. Or reacts poorly to boundaries.
Exactly.
So how do you actually, how do you go about doing that?
Well, I think the first thing is to identify your non-negotiables, the behaviors that you absolutely will not tolerate, and then communicate those boundaries clearly and calmly, using I statements. For example, you could say, I feel disrespected when you speak to me that way, and I will not tolerate it. Yeah? If you continue, I will leave the room.
Okay, so you have to back up your words with actions too.
Exactly. Consistency is key. And remember, setting boundaries is not about controlling the other person. It's about protecting yourself and your well-being.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So what's step number 4?
Step 4 is especially important if the relationship involves any kind of abuse, and that is creating a safety plan.
Okay, so this is about putting your safety first, above all else.
Exactly.
What are some of the key elements of a safety plan?
Well, it might involve saving some money, identifying a safe place to stay if you need to leave quickly, having a list of emergency contacts, and knowing what steps to take if you're in immediate danger.
Okay, so it's about being prepared and having a plan. Are there resources to help people create a safety plan?
Absolutely. There are a lot of resources available online and through domestic violence organizations.
Okay, good to know. So then what is step 5?
Step 5 is gradual disengagement.
Gradual disengagement. Okay, so why is that sometimes necessary?
Sometimes it's safer to slowly reduce contact and distance yourself from the toxic individual, especially if there's a risk of retaliation, or if you just need some time to build up your strength and your resources before making a more decisive break.
Okay, so it's not always about like that big dramatic confrontation.
Not necessarily.
It's more about strategically creating space and protecting yourself.
Exactly.
How would you actually do that?
It could look like declining invitations, limiting phone calls, gradually spending less time together. The key is just to prioritize your safety and well-being while you're creating that distance.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What's step 6?
If it's safe to do so, having a direct conversation with the person about your decision to end the relationship can be really helpful for closure. But it's important to plan this conversation carefully and to really focus on your needs and your feelings, not on blaming the other person.
Okay, so it's not about trying to change their mind.
No,
It's about being very clear about your decision.
exactly. You could
Okay.
say something like, I've decided that this relationship is no longer healthy for me and I'm ending it. I wish you well, but I'm moving on.
Okay, so just very clear and to the point.
Yes.
So what's next?
In some cases, cutting off contact completely may be necessary.
Wow, okay, so when would that be?
This is really important for protecting yourself from further harm and to really allow yourself to heal and move on.
Okay, so it's not about punishment, it's about protecting yourself.
Exactly.
And that might involve what, like blocking their number?
It might, blocking phone numbers, emails, social media accounts, anything that helps you create a clean break.
Wow, okay, that's a big step. So what's step 8?
Step 8 is seeking professional help. Therapy. Therapists can provide really invaluable guidance and support during this difficult time. They can help you process your emotions, rebuild your self-esteem, and, develop those healthier relationship patterns for the future.
It's about investing in yourself and in your future.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. We're almost there. What are the last 2 steps?
Step 9 is focusing on self-care.
Okay.
Ending a toxic relationship can be really draining, both emotionally and physically. So it's crucial to prioritize your well-being during this time.
So what would you say are some good self-care practices?
Well, it's really about doing anything that nourishes your mind, your body, and your spirit. Things like getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, exercise, spending time in nature, maybe pursue some hobbies that you enjoy, or connecting with loved ones who bring you joy.
Right, so it's about treating yourself with kindness and compassion
Exactly.
and giving yourself the space and time you need to heal.
Absolutely.
And finally, step number 10.
Step 10 is all about reflecting and learning. Once you've created some distance from that toxic relationship, it's really important to take some time to reflect on what happened and try to learn from the experience.
Yeah, so it's not just about escaping the bad relationship. It's about figuring out why it happened and how you can prevent it from happening again.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like we've learned so much from the warning signs to the different types of toxic relationships. And most importantly, these concrete steps for breaking free and creating those healthier connections.
I agree. It's a heavy topic.
Yeah.
But I really do hope that our listeners feel empowered by this knowledge.
Me too.
Remember, you deserve to be in relationships that bring you joy, support, and a sense of true connection.
Absolutely. You are not alone. If you are struggling, please reach out for support. There are resources available. And you deserve to be happy. And you deserve to have healthy, fulfilling relationships. So that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Take care.